point, it's clear that every effort is being made from family and law enforcement to get Nancy home. But there were 4 things that stuck out to the former agent who spoke to me after he watched Savannah's message.
I can break a little news on your program here that I spoke with a detective earlier today, and effective Monday, this investigation will essentially be moved to the task force entirely.
Day 50 since Nancy Guthrie vanished from her home in the Catalina foothills of Tucson. 50 long days. Still no arrest, no named suspect, no confirmed breakthrough has been revealed to the public. And yet this week, 2 chilling developments surfaced, shifts that are quietly but powerfully reshaping the course of this investigation in ways the public can no longer afford to ignore. The first came after weeks of silence. The Guthrie family finally spoke, but not emotionally, not impulsively. Their message arrived in the form of a tightly controlled written statement. And for the first time in these 50 days, they didn't speak broadly, they aimed directly. Their focus, the people of Tucson. Every word felt intentional, calculated, almost surgical. Someone local knows something. Someone nearby holds the missing piece. This wasn't a vague plea for help. It was a precise signal directed at a very specific group. And more importantly, it wasn't released casually. It was cleared line by line by the Federal Bureau of Investigation before ever reaching the public. The second development may be even more unsettling. A former detective and state trooper, someone with decades of behavioral profiling experience, stepped forward. In a conversation with one of the most trusted investigative journalists following this case, he did something no official source had done yet. He pointed to a likely direction, a real one. According to his assessment, the person responsible didn't just vanish into thin air after taking Nancy. They retreated somewhere specific, a base, a location that wasn't random. His conclusion? South Tucson. For the first time, a precise area was named publicly, and not by speculation, but by someone whose entire career has been built on understanding how criminals think. At the same time, the FBI has been quietly examining a vacant property sitting right next to Nancy's home. Not just as a coincidence, but as a potential staging ground. A place that may have been used weeks, even months, before she disappeared. And then there's something even stranger. A former neighbor, someone who had already moved away before Nancy vanished, has reportedly been seen returning to that street after she was gone. And then comes a detail that feels almost too precise to ignore. Every single key date in this case, January 11th, January 24th, February 1st, falls on a weekend. Not midweek, not random. Weekends. Every single time. Investigators are now asking a question that changes everything. What if the person who took Nancy isn't some outsider drifting through the city, but someone deeply embedded in it? Someone with a routine, a structured life, a job they show up to Monday through Friday. And then, when the weekend comes, they transform. Watching, planning, moving quietly through the neighborhood, building a plan piece by piece until the moment finally came to execute it. Because the deeper this investigation goes, the clearer that possibility becomes. And if that's true, then this person may have already walked past the growing memorial outside Nancy's home. They may have stood there unnoticed. They may be watching the coverage from a living room just miles away, sitting at work on a Monday morning, blending in, while carrying a secret no one around them could even imagine. Now, everything starts to connect, but only if you look closely, because every detail in this case links to another. Threads that, until now, have been scattered and fragmented across coverage that never fully pulled them together. Day 50, and the silence finally broke. Not through tears on social media, not through a dramatic press conference, but through a statement, deliberate, controlled, and loaded with meaning. It was delivered to Tucson's local NBC affiliate, KVOA. And in a case that is now firmly in federal hands, nothing like this is accidental. At this stage, words aren't just expressions of grief, they are strategy. Every sentence carries weight. Every phrase is placed with purpose. Nothing slips through without federal approval. When the Guthrie family chose to speak on Day 50, they weren't just speaking to the public, they were speaking to someone specific. Brian Enton, News Nation's senior investigative reporter, has been on the ground in Tucson almost since the beginning. He didn't just read the statement, he dissected it, line by line, and his conclusion was clear. There was nothing accidental about it, not a single word. And then there were the words, the ones that made every investigative reporter pause and every law enforcement analyst lean in. The Guthrie family said this. They believe the answers are here within the Tucson community and across southern Arizona. One word stood out more than anything else, Tucsonans. That wasn't accidental. That wasn't vague. That wasn't a random choice of language. They didn't say a drifter passing through. They didn't point to someone from another state who scoped the area from afar. They said Tucsonans, people rooted in that city. People who know those roads without thinking. People who blend in so seamlessly they become invisible. The kind of person who could drive past Nancy Guthrie's home again and never raise a single suspicion. Because they belong there. They're familiar. They're part of the everyday background. Not outsiders. Not strangers. Regulars. According to Brian Enton, this isn't a new theory. It's something law enforcement has quietly believed from the very beginning. Behind the scenes, within the task force, the same conclusion keeps resurfacing. The person responsible is local. Not just from Tucson, but possibly from that exact neighborhood or just streets away. It's been an unspoken thread running through the entire investigation, growing stronger with time. But now, on day 50, that theory isn't hidden anymore. The family has brought it into the open through a statement carefully shaped and approved by the Federal Bureau of Investigation. This wasn't a routine update. This was a message. Direct, intentional, and aimed at someone who, right now, could be watching. Then came another detail, one that hadn't been publicly revealed before. Not just the date January 11th, but the late evening of January 11th. A very specific moment in time. And suddenly, that detail changes everything. Sources close to the investigation told Enton that the doorbell camera images, the ones showing a man without a backpack, may trace back to that exact night. A completely different version of the suspect compared to the February 1st footage, where he appears prepared, equipped, ready. If that's true, it means the first confirmed visit didn't happen days before the abduction. It happened weeks earlier. 3 weeks. That transforms this from a sudden act into something far more calculated. A slow build. A process. Surveillance that began long before anyone realized what was unfolding. And it's not just one source saying this. For major networks, ABC News, NBC, Fox News, and News Nation have all reported independently that those surveillance images came from separate dates, separate visits, separate moments where someone returned again and again. The sheriff, publicly, has pushed back on that narrative, repeatedly. But sources inside the investigation, they're not backing down. Now step back and look at the dates. Really look at them. January 11th, Sunday. January 24th, Saturday. February 1st, early hours of Sunday, the night Nancy was taken. Every single key moment, in this case, lands on a weekend. Not once, not twice, every time. That's not coincidence. That's behavior. And behavior leaves patterns. Because criminals don't operate randomly, they operate within the limits of their lives, their schedules, their routines. And this pattern is pointing somewhere very specific. It's pointing to someone who lives a structured life during the week and becomes someone else entirely when the weekend begins. Picture the kind of person investigators are now zeroing in on. Not a drifter, not someone floating from place to place, but someone with structure, someone tied to a routine, work, school, obligations that lock them into a Monday through Friday life and quietly free them on weekends. Someone who doesn't need to plan a long trip or book a room to reach the Catalina foothills. Just a short drive, in and out, no trace. The kind of person who could pull up on a Saturday night, walk the street, study a house, feel something isn't right, and leave. No pressure, no loss. Then come back the next weekend, and the next. Waiting, adjusting, watching until every variable aligns perfectly. That profile doesn't belong to a transient. It doesn't fit someone passing through from another state. This is someone embedded deep inside Tucson's daily rhythm. Someone who knows the streets without needing directions. Someone for whom that neighborhood isn't unfamiliar territory, it's part of their world. And then came the development that shifted everything. This week, former detective and state trooper Morgan Wright sat down with Brian Enton and used a term that immediately changed how experts began looking at this case: marauder. That word isn't casual, it's clinical. In behavioral profiling, a marauder is a very specific type of offender. Someone who operates from a fixed home base. They leave that base to commit the crime, and then they return to it. No long distance travel. No unfamiliar terrain. Everything happens within a controlled, known radius. A marauder stays close. Close enough to move freely. Close enough to abandon a plan if something goes wrong, and try again later without consequence. Close enough to watch, patiently, over time, until they understand everything. Routines, patterns, weak points. The kind of knowledge this crime clearly required. But Wright didn't stop at behavior. He went further, into geography. Based on how the suspect was dressed, the apparent urgency after the abduction, and the physical layout of the area, Wright pointed to a direction. Not vaguely, specifically, South Tucson, because to the north, the terrain works against you. Mountains, barriers, routes that slow you down when speed matters most. But to the south, open paths, faster exits, roads that make sense for someone trying to disappear quickly without drawing attention. That's where decades of Wright's experience is pointing. And when someone with that level of expertise narrows it down that far, it's not speculation. It's a lead worth taking seriously. Now, take that geographic insight and layer it over what the Federal Bureau of Investigation is actively working on right now. Right next to Nancy Guthrie's home, there's a vacant house, and it's no longer being ignored. Investigators are treating it as a potential staging ground, a place that may have been used long before the night she vanished. Retired SWAT Commander Bob Guthrie spoke about this in detail, and his assessment adds another layer of unease. A vacant property like that isn't just empty space, it's opportunity, cover, a reason to be there at odd hours without raising suspicion. From inside that house, someone could observe everything. Daily routines, when she came and went, which nights the lights went out early, when the driveway sat empty, when she was alone, completely and undeniably alone. And it doesn't stop there. According to Guthrie, a location like that could even be used to install concealed surveillance, hidden equipment, watching the street, monitoring movement, all without leaving a visible footprint outside. No parked car, no lingering figure, just a dark, empty house that nobody questions because empty houses don't draw attention. Think about the implications of that. Someone could have been just feet away for weeks, maybe months, building a precise, almost surgical understanding of Nancy Guthrie's life without ever being seen. And then there's another detail, one that feels almost too coincidental to ignore. Brian Enton confirmed that the FBI is now asking pointed questions about a former neighbor, someone who had already moved away before Nancy disappeared, but has since been seen returning to the area. Not moving on, not starting fresh somewhere else, leaving and then coming back. The Pima County Sheriff's Department has acknowledged this angle publicly. As of March 20th, detectives are actively reviewing reports of suspicious activity connected to that very same vacant property. And when you start putting all of this together, the pattern, the location, the behavior, it stops feeling random. It starts feeling planned. And then there's the neighbor who had been watching that street for decades. Aldine Meister, who lived next door for 30 years, didn't speak in speculation. She spoke with certainty. She told investigators plainly, the neighbors beside her had moved out, and something about that empty house didn't sit right. She pushed for it to be checked. And this time, the Federal Bureau of Investigation listened. They went back. They looked again. Now step back and reconstruct the timeline, because this sequence isn't just important, it's the backbone of everything. Footage captured by the doorbell camera, confirmed across 4 separate networks, each relying on independent law enforcement sources, places the suspect at Nancy Guthrie's property on at least 2 different occasions. And what's chilling is how different those visits look. The first time, he doesn't arrive like someone ready to act. No backpack, no visible tools, just observation, studying angles, noticing details, looking directly at the camera, almost as if mapping its reach. Then he leaves. No forced entry, no confrontation, just a quiet retreat into the night. But the second visit, it's a completely different person. Now the mask is secured. A firearm is in place. A backpack, filled with whatever he needed, is strapped on. And this time, he doesn't hesitate. This isn't reconnaissance anymore. This is execution. A plan that had been rehearsed, refined, and locked in. 2 visits, 2 versions of the same individual. And between those moments lies the most revealing gap of all, the time he went back home. Time to think, to replay what he saw, to prepare, to gather what he needed, and most importantly, to decide when to return. Because someone who can walk away the first time and come back later isn't traveling from far away. That's not someone dealing with distance, hotels, or complicated logistics. That's someone local. Someone who can leave and return without effort. Someone for whom the Catalina foothills isn't a destination, it's within reach. Familiar ground. And then another thread begins to tighten. One the FBI is now pulling with unmistakable precision. Investigators aren't making broad inquiries. They're asking for something very specific. Every single name tied to construction sites in the immediate area. Not companies, not permits, individuals. Every worker, every contractor, anyone who had a reason to be on that street during the critical window. Former FBI agent Steve Moore laid out exactly why this matters. And once you see it, you can't unsee it. From the beginning, one theory has quietly driven the investigation. This wasn't random. It was targeted. And whoever planned it had something incredibly valuable, access. The kind of access you can't fake or quickly create from a distance. Think about what a construction site gives you. You show up every morning in a truck. You carry tools. You belong there. People see you day after day until you fade into the background. You become invisible, not because you're hidden, but because you're expected. No one questions a worker in a hard hat. No one calls police on a construction crew. And while you're there, you can watch everything. Which car pulls into which driveway. How long it takes someone to walk from garage to front door. Where cameras are mounted, and whether they're active or just for show. Over time, patterns emerge. You notice which houses have dogs, which ones have visitors, which homes go dark early, and which stay lit deep into the night. You start to understand rhythms, habits, vulnerabilities. Weeks of this kind of presence build something powerful, an almost complete blueprint of someone's life. The kind of insight this crime clearly required. And here's where it gets even more unsettling. The person gathering that information doesn't have to be the one who showed up on February 1st. They don't need to wear the mask. They don't need to step inside the house. They just need to watch and then pass that knowledge to someone who will. That's why the FBI wants every name. Not out of routine, but with purpose. This isn't a broad sweep. It's a focused search for someone who either saw too much or knew exactly what they were looking at. And then another layer surfaced this week, one that forces you to rethink everything. Forensic behavioral expert Brant Smith raised a pattern that investigators know all too well, and one that becomes deeply unsettling when placed into this case. In crimes like this, he explained to Fox News, offenders don't always disappear after the act. Sometimes they come back. Not recklessly, not obviously, but quietly, blending in. This is the kind of individual who could return to the growing memorial outside Nancy Guthrie's home. The kind of person who could stand shoulder to shoulder with grieving strangers, watching as flowers pile up and candles flicker. Someone who might even take photos of the tribute. Someone who could attend vigils, not as a suspect, but as just another face in the crowd. Present, observing, invisible. And here's the part that makes it even more disturbing. Brian Entin said this out loud, on record. It's entirely possible the suspect has already appeared in video footage taken outside that house. Already been captured, already been seen, and simply not recognized. This isn't speculation. It's documented behavior. In case after case, offenders return, not out of necessity, but compulsion. To relive it, to measure the reaction, to watch the impact unfold in real time. That's why investigators aren't overlooking anyone. Every single person who has approached that memorial has been observed. Carefully, now shift to the one element that could end all of this, the DNA. Because ultimately, this case doesn't hinge on theory. It resolves in science. Inside Nancy's home, investigators recovered foreign DNA. Genetic material that doesn't belong to her and doesn't match anyone who had legitimate access to that house. And it's not simple. It's a mixed profile, multiple contributors, now undergoing advanced analysis at a private lab in Florida. But here's where it becomes powerful. Forensic genetic genealogy has officially been launched. The same method that identified Brian Kohberger. The same breakthrough technique that unmasked Joseph James D'Angelo after decades in the shadows. This process doesn't require the suspect to already be in a police database. It doesn't depend on prior arrests. It works differently. It starts with fragments, partial DNA connections to distant relatives who willingly uploaded their data to platforms like GED Match, 23andMe, or Ancestry DNA. One distant match is enough. From there, investigators build outward, mapping family trees, connecting branches, narrowing possibilities, until a single name begins to emerge from what once looked like noise. Brian Entin has said it clearly, DNA is what will break this case open. And forensic expert April Stonehouse confirmed that the analysis is moving fast, faster than many expected. Behind the scenes, according to retired FBI agent Jennifer Coffindaffer, this investigation is red hot. More leads, more movement, more activity than most cases ever see at this stage. But here's the part that changes how you look at the DNA entirely. If the person responsible is truly local, if their base is somewhere near South Tucson, if they were working construction in the Catalina foothills during January or using that vacant house during weeks of surveillance, then their DNA isn't just inside the home from the night of the abduction. It could be everywhere. On a gate latch touched casually during an earlier visit, on a utility box that had already drawn investigators' attention, on surfaces brushed during quiet reconnaissance, long before anyone knew a crime was coming. Weeks of presence means layers of evidence, traces left behind without urgency, without caution, because at that point, no one was looking. And now, every name the FBI is collecting from construction crews, from former residents, from anyone tied to that street, isn't just a lead. It's a potential match. Every single one of them can be compared against what's sitting in that Florida lab right now. Because genetic genealogy doesn't wait for a suspect to slip up. It doesn't require them to have a record. It doesn't need them to ever have been caught before. All it needs is one connection. And once it finds it, everything starts to close in. It needs one relative, one distant family member who shared their DNA with a consumer service at any point. And in 2026, all with the genealogy database populations that currently exist, the probability that any individual in the United States has zero relatives who have ever submitted a sample to any consumer platform approaches zero. The tree will build. The question is only how long it takes. This week, the sheriff said something in a local Tucson radio interview that was notably more candid and less guarded than anything he has said in any of his national media appearances. He said, and the phrasing is worth noting exactly, "Yes, I know a lot, but I am not going to share that with the public. It is about protecting the integrity of the investigation." He knows something. The FBI knows something. Well, and the DNA processing that is running right now in that private laboratory in Florida may be the mechanism that finally converts what they know from investigative intelligence into courtroom-ready evidence that can support a prosecution. Now, there is one section of the Guthrie family statement released this week that did not make the headlines of most coverage, but that is arguably the most significant thing the family has said publicly in 50 days, and it needs to be heard in full and understood for what it is actually saying. The family wrote that they want to celebrate NY's beautiful and courageous life, but that they cannot do that until she is brought to a final place of rest. Read that phrase again carefully. A final place of rest, not until she comes home. See, not until she walks back through the door of the house she has lived in for 50 years. A final place of rest. That is a family that has been living with the full weight of what the evidence and the passage of time are telling them. That is a family that loves their mother completely and is also beginning to prepare gently and with evident heartbreak for every possibility that 50 days without proof of life may represent. And then they wrote this: "We cannot grieve. We can only ache and wonder." Those words were approved by the FBI. Those words were chosen deliberately. And those words describe exactly what it looks like to be 50 days into the disappearance of an 84-year-old woman who requires daily cardiac medication, who has a pacemaker that went silent on the night of February 1st, and from whom no credible proof of life has emerged in nearly 2 months, 50 days. A family that has done everything right throughout all of it. Savannah is breaking down on Instagram in videos that were painful to watch. Annie was weeping audibly at the memorial outside her mother's home. Cameron is speaking directly on camera to whoever took their mother. A family that cooperated fully with every investigative request that offered $1 million reward, that stood in front of every camera available to them and held on publicly through everything. And now, in a carefully crafted statement approved by the FBI, they are beginning gently and with evident courage to hold open space for every possible truth about where their mother is. Nancy Guthrie was 84 years old. She had lived in that community for 50 years. Then she had dinner with her family on a Saturday evening, played card games, laughed, and trusted the world around her completely. She deserved to go home safely that night. She deserves to come home now. And somebody in Tucson knows what happened during those 41 minutes. Somebody who works a regular job in this city during the week. Somebody who knows those streets from personal daily experience. Somebody who may have stood on that specific street and watched that specific house from the outside across multiple weekends in January. Somebody who knows exactly where they went after they left that neighborhood in the early morning hours of February 1st and exactly what they did when they got there. The Guthrie family pointed directly at the Tucson community in a statement the FBI approved word for word. A former detective with decades of behavioral analysis experience named South Tucson as the likely base of operations. A vacant house immediately adjacent to NY's property is being investigated as a staging location for extended pre-abduction surveillance. A neighbor who moved out of that street kept coming back after the disappearance. Every date, investigators have flagged falls on a weekend. The DNA is in active processing in a Florida laboratory. Forensic genetic genealogy has been initiated, and the sheriff said publicly this week that he knows things he cannot yet share. This case is not cold, is not stalled, is not running out of threads to pull. It is narrowing methodically and deliberately toward one geographic area, one neighborhood, as one person who has been sustaining the ordinary appearance of a normal daily life in a city they call home, while carrying the full weight of what they did on the night of February 1st. If you are in Tucson tonight and you know someone whose behavior changed in the days or weeks around February 1st, if you noticed a vehicle on your street on January 11th or January 24th that had no obvious reason to be there, if you worked construction in the Catalina foothills area during January or early February and saw something during those weeks that did not sit right with you at the time, if you know someone who suddenly seemed different after the news of NY's disappearance broke, make the call tonight. Contact the FBI at 1-800-CALL-FBI. That number is 1-800-225-5324. You can submit a tip online at Tips. FBI Algo, or contact the Puma County Sheriff's Department directly at 520-35149. Oh, everything is completely anonymous. The reward is over $1 million. No ID required. Cash at a neutral location. Sometimes the right person sees the right story at exactly the right moment. And that one person could be the thing that brings Nancy home. 50 days, one family is still waiting. One city that holds the answer, and an investigation that is closer tonight than has ever been to the name at the end of that genealogy tree. Nancy Guthrie deserves to come.